Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's our pleasure tonight to have with us Tracie Provost. And we often have Dr. Buck Melton here, but I think you're, at least in many ways, an improvement. Nothing personal out there, Buck. I hope you don't take offense to those words, but I'll just let it go at that. Well, so Tracie, tell me about yourself. You're a writer and an academic person. What is your academic story?
I am a history professor at Middle Georgia State University. I've been there for 20 years this year.
And so you know Dr. Buck Melton there.
Yes,
is that correct?
I do. Yes.
Have you found yourself improved with that relationship? Does
yes,
that improve you in any way?
Yes,
oh, good.
He has given me numerous new authors to read. He has definitely broadened my horizons, and I have had many wonderful conversations with both he and his wife, Carol.
Very nice wife, very good, a wise lady
yes.
also. Well, now, you're a European historian.
Yes.
Any particular part of Europe that interests you? It's a big
20th
place.
century Europe. I am a Holocaust specialist.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes.
Wow. It's a terrible thing, although there had been little flashes of that sort of behavior earlier.
Yes.
It didn't just start with
no.
It was
no. I make it very clear to my students that it did not start with the gas chambers. It started much earlier.
Maybe 1,000 years earlier. It's a
Oh,
long
easily.
time. Yes,
Oh,
yes.
easily.
It's interesting, isn't it? The urban, rural, the differences, the outliers,
Yes.
whatever. So easy it is to demonize people. People need scapegoats is a word, but they need demons. They need to
Yes.
imagine the demons are out there, and they can be sanctified if they kill a few. I mean, maybe that's the way they look at it.
Yes.
The enemies.
Very
Well,
much so.
On that subject, well, now I see some nice books in front of us. So maybe you can hold. Why don't we just hold one up? And that's a pretty unusual thing for an academic. I guess we could putting that up there for an academic person to turn into a novelist. Did you? Were you had sort of I guess a schizophrenic education? You were torn between English and history. Is that
yes.
right? Yes.
Well, I always wanted to be a novelist, and somewhere around, I don't know, 9th grade,
Yes.
someone told me that you could not make a living. And so
Well, did you find that to be the case?
I decided that I would go and be a history professor because that was just so much more.
You were,
yeah.
you were after
I
the
got
big
one.
money. Is that right?
I think if people had told me.
You weren't lured into the big money? No.
No, I think if people had told me that the chances of me getting a tenure track job were as thin as they were, I would have stuck with being a novelist.
Yes, well, yeah, that's right. Well, so you've always liked writing, and it's sort of a counterpoint to the sort of doctrinaire history, the fact, Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am. So you just and then you can just let your
My
imagination wander wherever it goes, and apparently it has. So
Yes.
now let's see. I think you were speaking to me off camera. The heroine of these two books is a voodoo queen or
voodoo priestess,
priestess.
yes.
Well, why don't you discuss that? As to how that
Well, basically, she was born in the French colony of Saint-Domingue in the 1760s. She survived the revolution in Saint-Domingue, which became Haiti. She fled to New Orleans, where she became a vampire.
Oh, is that right? And well, that's interesting. We could talk about I guess the if you want to call it the revolution or the extraordinary change that took place in Haiti. It was rather a really volcanic time, to use that phrase. Lots of terrible things happened. The situation was terrible to start with.
Absolutely.
And it ended in a terrible way.
Absolutely.
And so people fled. I think Now, looking, it looks like she's of mixed ancestry
She
here.
is, yes.
Now, was that, which is a common, I mean, I guess the aristocrats now in Haiti are similar in appearance. Is that a fair
Yeah,
statement?
they were, she is a gens de couleur, which is, should be biracial.
Yes.
Her mother was also of mixed heritage in my world. Her father was a wealthy white planter.
Yes.
And in my world, her parents were actually married. And that was not all that unusual, at least in Saint-Domingue.
But not in the South. I mean,
no,
that was
no,
impossible.
no, no,
So I mean, she
no.
must have had a difficult time of it. And I think in France, just the general French view of biracial events was a lot more benign.
Yes.
And fleeing, would that have been?
That was-
would she have fled to a slave? I mean, I don't know. Well, she
would
would
have-
have gone to a slave state there. Going to Louisiana would have.
Well, Louisiana at that time was actually, it was a Spanish colony.
Okay.
It was not
1790s, 93? No, well, later, 98, 99.
1792
Okay.
in
All right.
my
All
world.
right. Okay.
Is when she flees. And so there is slavery there. Certainly there was slavery in Saint-Domingue. But there was a very heavy influx of refugees from Saint-Domingue into specifically New Orleans, because it had been a French colony before it bounced to Spain, and then back to France, and then back to Spain, and then America took it. And
Right. Well, I mean, and I think the normal refugee would have been a Caucasian planter who would arrive with stories of terrible things happening. Might have encouraged some of the restrictions were placed on Afro-Americans, that event.
Well, actually, there was a large number of gens de couleur planters
really?
who owned slaves, and they did flee to New Orleans, and many took their slaves with them.
Isn't that interesting? I found that as an interesting story there.
Yes.
Where getting to New Orleans, was that a complicated story in your books here?
Actually, in my books, this had already happened.
Okay, now we're
these
getting yeah.
actually take place in the modern era, about 2009.
Well, let's see. Okay, so indeed, the person came in, we'll say 1793, shows up, and then becomes a vampire, or and then and then presumably lives thereafter a normal life.
She is staked soon afterwards. She is put into a coma-like state, and she stays there for the better part of 200 years until she is revived.
How did
my
that
world,
happen?
They pulled the stake out.
Well, I should have known. So someone had was it a silver stake? Or how do you do a vampire in? I'm sure you're an expert on this. How would you?
Actually, in my world, what I did was I went and I looked at the old folklore. And one of the reasons why so many of the bodies that they unearth that have silver or iron nails through them, it's to keep the vampire from rising.
Yes.
They can't rise if they are staked, if you will. And so, yes, she had an iron rod inserted into her chest, and
presumably she had been misbehaving for this to happen. Or you're unclear of what?
Well, actually, As it turns out, there were a group who, the vampire hunters, they
were around. Oh, really?
Oh, yes. They did not like that, there were vampires in New Orleans who were
right.
Drinking blood and having a good time.
Right. Fruit bats were bad enough floating
Yes,
around there, but
yes.
but then these vampires appeared.
Yes.
And so they found her. She was and then.
And then they stowed her off in a crypt.
Right. And then,
and it's very unclear throughout the first book why they didn't just kill her.
well, but she made it out, and then I guess the story is going to be at this point, she's emerged after 200 years of sleep.
Basically.
And she's hungry for blood.
Yes.
She's pretty hungry, ready to eat, right?
Oh, very much so.
And so she's in the, in New Orleans. She's on Bourbon Street, wandering around. That's exactly who you would expect to run into there.
Actually, she is presented with a young victim, and she does kill him.
It's a him.
It's a him, yes.
Yes, yes.
And she feels very bad about it because
Now, is he turned into a vampire? Is
No.
that,
No. There is a mechanism to turn humans into vampires, but it requires a second step. The human must ingest vampire blood, not just be
Oh, really?
drained.
So, I see. Well, she had a good, healthy meal. And was this
She
guy's name Bob? What was his name?
No, he does not. He never has a name.
No, he's a nameless victim.
The poor kid. He's a youngish boy.
Probably on the lookout for companionship and discovers he's run into a vampire. Well, okay, so she had this delicious meal.
She has this delicious
meal.
And
then what's up?
well, her sire, the man who made her a vampire, takes her to the vampire ruler of New Orleans.
Okay.
And
that's sort of a voodoo part. It plays itself out a little bit here, or not? I don't.
It does, because she ends up saving the vampire master of the city's human nephew.
Oh, really?
She heals him
Okay.
using a very old ritual that she claims is voodoo. It's
Right.
not quite, but
so,
we're playing
all
with
right,
some history and facts
actually,
here.
well, of course. So she's had these adventures. Did she? What's like? Vampires they can't be out in the daylight.
Not during the day.
Did she have a place to go?
Yes.
Or a cellar somewhere? Or
Luckily, she has a house that has been kept for her for the better part of 200 years.
Well.
And it has been light-proofed, and they're very urban. They're very progressive.
Yeah.
Many of the vampires
May I
are
ask her political affiliation, or did you get into that?
Actually, she at this point she doesn't have one.
Okay, I'm just checking.
She is.
She's not a Trump supporter. Just checking. No. Okay. No. All right.
No,
all right.
she would not have been. Well, this was actually. This takes place pre-Trump.
Back in the Nixon era, or
No. About 2009. So this would have been Obama era.
Okay.
And the reason why that is, I needed a year where there was a cold blue moon, which is where you've got two full moons in December, and that happened to be that year, and that's why the book was
all right,
set.
I understand it, right, and so she had these adventures. And
she's still having these adventures. I'm working on the third book.
All right, now this is book 1 and 2. What happened in book 2? Is that a continuation of the same story here?
Yeah, basically, she runs into a group of people who are trying to open up the gates of hell. and she is tasked with making sure that
Christ harried hell, if I get that right, is a similar kind of thing here. Is that right? You spent a couple of days there.
Yeah,
Right.
but there's actually 13 gates of hell throughout the world, in my world,
right.
and there's a group called the gatekeepers, and they watch those gates, and they make sure that nothing goes in or comes out that's not supposed to. Well, basically, nothing is supposed
And
to
so
come through
she
those
wanted to
gates.
go there? Wow.
No. She is tasked with making sure that that gate stays closed, and if someone else tries to open it, she's going to have to sacrifice herself to keep it closed.
Oh, really? So, well, I mean, why is that? That's the deal, or is she?
She is a thaumaturge. She has magic in her blood and bones, and there is a prophecy that says that one will come forward with magic and blood and bone to open the gates of hell, and only someone else with magic in bone and blood
Right.
will be able to stop it.
Right.
And this will happen on the cold blue moon.
Wow. So now, is this some dogma that's in voodoo circles?
Oh no, I absolutely made this up. I totally made this up.
Right. It's not perceived wisdom.
No. This is the fantasy portion of my book.
Okay. Well, so all right. So she's still in New Orleans, is that right?
Oh yes, she's still in New Orleans. There is a group that is trying very desperately to open the gate to hell that is in New Orleans, and she is determined to stop them.
Wow. And are these pretty seedy characters that want to do, like a motorcycle gang that wants to do it?
No.
Are they
they were actually, some of them are other vampires that want to do it. There is she's going to find out later that there is a section of the Catholic Church that would like to do it. There's a few magic users who would like to do it. There's a whole bunch of nefarious people who want to do this.
It's probably a bad idea, though. I mean, you could imagine it would be good to.
Juliet thinks this is a
let
terrible,
the demons out.
terrible idea. And not because she actually has any love for humans. She just doesn't want to see her source of nutrition die off.
Well, that's,
She's very pragmatic.
So now she's ageless, too. She never ages.
Yes.
Never ages.
Yeah, she's about 28.
28 years old. Is she a sports fan? Is there anything she likes to go to football games or?
Her new boyfriend has been trying to teach her modern ways, and she's very. She goes along with it.
Yeah, so let's go bowling tonight.
Yes, actually, that's one of their first dates. He takes her to the Rock and Bowl.
Oh, that's right. See, I hit that right.
Down.
And he's a vampire too.
Yes, he is.
Do they have a little club where they met, or a little vampire club, or?
Actually, he owns a nightclub in New Orleans.
Okay.
The Cowboy, and although it's less a mecca for vampires than just anyone who wants to go
Mississippi tourists that might stumble in there. Yes.
Well, it is a very nice place to go in and grab a quick snack.
Yes.
One thing, my vampires try very hard not to kill their human victims, not because they love humans or anything, but, too many dead bodies create too many questions.
Right.
And the idea is to fly under the radar. You don't want the human authorities to know that you exist.
It sounds like an opening for a protagonist, maybe a member of the New Orleans Police Department that's on the, no?
Well, actually, the police commissioner in New Orleans is a vampire.
Oh, there you go. Well, that idea didn't work. Huh?
And about half of the New Orleans.
Oh, really?
They're all on the take, you know.
Right. So there's not a, like a person that's brooding about it. Let's see. I was thinking, what's the great book? What am I going to come up with? Set in New Orleans. The very funny book. Am I blocking on his name? Confederacy of Deuces. Dunces and Deuces.
Yes.
Right. It sounds like it has a little.
Flavor. It
sounds like it's a little flavor of that.
Yeah, there are some Keystone Cops moments.
Yes.
And in my second book, she does run into a very earnest detective who is not a vampire.
There we go. I knew this would happen.
And
see,
yes.
I leaped ahead. I knew that would happen.
And she is working
now, is
very hard.
Is there a romance between the two? That would
no. She has her vampire lover, and they're very happy together.
Is he a full-blooded policeman, if one could say it that way? I mean, in other words, is that in her mind? Is the two are crossing paths? They have different objectives, in other words.
Well, she's working very hard to keep him in the dark,
right?
About what she is, but also about what he is, because he's a magic user, but he doesn't know it.
What is a magic user?
Basically, someone who has magical abilities.
Yes.
Hers manifests in voodoo. Many in New Orleans would follow the voodoo. Others are elemental witches or magic users. They use the various elements: water, fire, earth, air, and then, of course, spirit.
Yes. Well, and it sounds like a coven.
Oh yes, actually, my vampires belong to covens.
Oh really?
Yes.
And you've got you call them your possessive of these vampires. Do you have little vampire figurines? That you,
no. I haven't gone that far yet. I do have a friend who does some graphic art.
Okay,
for
good.
me,
You can imagine.
on the computer.
These are pretty nice pictures. This is a very fetching lady. Now, so did someone do the artwork here for you?
Yeah,
they're
this
quite
one
fetching.
was done by my original publisher, and then this one I did self-publish, and I hired a graphic artist to go ahead and come up with something similar, but she's changed a little bit now that she's back in the real world, if you will.
Now, a third book is on the way, is that right?
A third book is on the way, and there's plans for a fourth.
Oh, wow.
This whole story will take four books to tell.
You know, it seems to me that this is a made-to-order political story, too. I mean, getting involved, take
there's
the
a
bus
lot
to
of
Washington.
politics.
That's good. I mean,
but
maybe she can run for
politics.
Congress. What about a political career for?
I don't.
It turns out there's a huge coven in Washington.
Yeah.
I mean, she might discover that.
Well, there is a coven in Washington, but we haven't run into them yet.
Well, I think that would be something to consider.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing to say that this won't spin off into other things.
I think that would be. I think the country would be ready for that, discovering that the vampires are the puppeteers that are manipulating.
They've been really trying to keep this under wraps, but it's getting harder as the internet becomes more prevalent.
There's a crisis, isn't there? Change is on the way, and how we're going to deal with it, and contemporary circumstances or changing the vampire world.
Yes, very much so. It's become harder to stay hidden because, it's very easy to look back in newspapers and say, wait a minute, there's a picture of this guy who looks exactly like this guy who's 50 years later, and then this other guy who's still alive, and they all have the same last name. And while genetics might hold true to an extent, wow, his great-great-grandfather looks just like him.
Well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, if you probe the mythology of that, eternal life, blood, injuring people, secret control, another world out there. It's a more adventurous world with all sorts of ups and downs that we, in our humdrum life, we can't anticipate. Is that well, how did you get started on this? Did you start with other maybe werewolves and then went into vampires? Or
actually, I started with the vampires and branched out into werewolves.
Now is there another series of?
No, well, the werewolves show up. Well, they are in the first book, but they become much more prominent in the second book. I do pull in a lot of the old mythology.
I can see that.
And vampires, werewolves, witches. There's demons that run through and run amok in New Orleans. They really just look a whole lot like drunk tourists.
Yes, that's right. You're wandering around and you suspect there's something. Well, I guess you're in a crowd with unusual people walking around. It would not be such a...
If you've ever been to, Bourbon Street at midnight.
I think I was in bed before then. But still, at 10 o'clock, it was still pretty bad.
I have to tell you that pretty much I've seen things that let's just say I've seen things.
I bet you have. Well, now, when you write your books, do you outline them? Do you just go chapter to chapter and see what happens?
I just go chapter to chapter. I did try to outline the second book, and by the third chapter, I never looked at the outline again.
So the characters just do their own thing here, and they intermingle.
I have some major plot points in my head that I know have to happen, and I know basically where in the book they will happen, but how they get there. Chuck Spencer, my New Orleans detective, he just showed up one morning as I was drinking my coffee and going, well, all right, what's she gonna do today? She's investigating a set of ritual murders. Well, let's give her an actual detective foil here that she has to
I approve of that.
around.
I think there could be some tension, but
there's a lot of tension that's coming. Not so much in this book, but in the next book.
And I think you could look at all that. He looks like a full-blooded guy there. On the other hand, I kind of like him. What should I do about this? Well, maybe that dilemma. I'm pretty hungry. Well,
the lucky thing is that there's Bourbon Street, and there's a lot of drunks on Bourbon Street, and they're pretty easy to drag into the alley and take a little sip and then send them back on their way.
Oh, you don't just do them in all together?
No,
just a little.
Just a little sip.
Does that turn them into vampires?
No. No, they have to ingest vampire blood themselves. Wow. And that's pretty much, you've got to have some forethought to do that.
Well, Tracie, it's been great talking to you. I hope let's hold these up, and our numerous viewers will like to, get where can they get these books?
They are available on Amazon.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, great. Well, I enjoyed talking to you and wish you well as you, both in your career as an historian and as a writer of vampire lore. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.